Well, it's inconceivable that anybody could be so incompetent, stupid, use any word you want to use, to imagine that you take out your military before you take out your U.S. citizens and civilians and others that maybe helped us. To even think of that it's not something that can be believed.
Well, it's former President Donald Trump on Greg Kelly earlier today, slamming Biden's failure in Afghanistan after calling it the most humiliating moment for the U.S. Now, today, President Biden once again took no questions from the media after briefly talking about vaccine mandates, turning his back on reporters asking about Afghanistan. Now, in a recent op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who also is a former Navy SEAL, retired lieutenant commander who served in Afghanistan, writes, "There are many options between nation building and giving up, and we had found a good one in Afghanistan before President Biden abandoned it." So, leading us now to Dan Crenshaw, Congressman from Texas. We appreciate you joining us tonight, sir. How are you?
Doing well. Always good to be with you, Carl.
Yeah, so I'm sorry it's under these circumstances again. So, Congressman, you sacrificed a lot for this country. You lost your eye in Afghanistan, and what we're seeing everything now unfold into chaos. Even you can probably agree that this is just a dumpster fire, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really disappointing to see. They couldn't have planned it in a worse way. And look, I mean, that op-ed I wrote is about the fallacy of thinking that we have to go to zero troops.
Right.
I think that's a fallacy to begin with. But obviously it's politically popular. And if we're going to do it, though, we better do it the right way. And you couldn't have done it in a worse way here. The State Department deserves a lot of scorn for this. The Secretary of State was in charge of evacuating civilians. You know, the DOD tried to keep Bagram, for instance, and Secretary of State overruled them, so it would look bad for optics. They didn't plan to evacuate U.S. citizens from the embassy, even as capitals around Afghanistan were falling to the Taliban. They were still not making contingency plans. It really is a dumpster fire, as you said.
Yeah, and the problem is too, you and I have seen this. I mean, look, we've been on the ground. We understand that sometimes the intelligence that we provide doesn't always make it all the way up to the top. Now, apparently, though, Biden has ignored requests from our defense officials to keep 2,500 troops in Afghanistan and warnings about the stability of the country. While Biden, once again, I mean, he took no questions from the media today at all whatsoever. But he did sit down with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, 10 feet apart, with very scripted things. Take a look at this real quick.
So you don't think this could have been handled, this actually could have been handled better in any way? No mistakes?
No, I don't think it could have been handled in a way that we're going to go back in hindsight and look, but the idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that happened.
So for you, that was always priced into the decision?
Yes.
Is this damage control, or did I just hear that conversation? Oh yeah, we knew this was going to happen. Are you kidding me?
It sounded like brutal honesty, to be honest. You know, I read that quote, and you know, the first thing that comes to mind, well, if you knew it was going to be chaos, then why do it?
Yeah.
Right. Because look, from a strategic point of view, you have to ask yourself a question: is the cost of leaving higher or lower than the cost of staying? And there's this mythology out there that we were still there nation building, trying to build a democracy. That's not true at all. We had a few thousand troops there conducting limited counterterrorism operations, keeping the Afghan army afloat, and preventing a terrorist safe haven. Yeah. If anything, that's a pretty low cost for a pretty high reward. Right. Americans have such a short memory. We forget what happened in 9/11, and we forget why we went there in the first place. So I've been hearing a lot on our side say, well, yeah, we obviously we should have invaded Afghanistan, but then we should have left. We should have left 19 years ago.
Right.
Well, that's not a very good strategic decision. You know, at least acknowledge how difficult of a decision that is, because if you just want to go in, kill a bunch of people, and then leave, well, then you're really just looking for revenge. You're not actually looking for a strategy. So don't pretend that's a strategy. Yeah. Denying terrorist safe haven, at least that's a strategy. You may not like that option. I don't like that option either, but it's also better than other options.
Right. And the notion, too, it's the threat that we are there. It's the fact that, like, hey, if you come out of your caves and try to do violence and take over this thing, we're still there. We still have the presence. You know, one of the things that grabbed me about this whole scenario here is, like you said, we're not really nation building over there. But what even more important, like rule number one, is you get a head count of how many people you have in where. And the DOD couldn't even give us, they were, I don't know, a few thousand, maybe 5,000, maybe it turns out it's like 11,000. And even with all those people there, there is word now that the Taliban was able to pre-position equipment and materials, organized, planned, executed, massive offensive. And this is going back to May. U.S. officials said that the local government and military forces should be able to hold out for 6 months to a year. My question to you, how in the world did they possibly do all this without some inside help from even some of the people that said they were on our side?
Yeah, I mean, well, as you know, look, one of our biggest fears when operating Afghanistan is what's called a green on blue, which means that there's somebody in the Afghan army who's been infiltrated by the Taliban, and then they shoot us in the back. It's rare, but it does happen. There's corruption, and of course, and there's also threats. I mean, look, this is a typical kind of war. It's a typical insurgency. But I think what strikes me from a lot of the intel reports is all of them said between 2 and 6 months Kabul would fall. And again, I have to ask our leaders, what do we get out of this? Just making ourselves feel good because we got the troop level down to 0? I mean, really, like what benefit is there to giving the Taliban this kind of control and really wasting a lot of time and effort on our part? It's deeply frustrating. And as President Trump said in that interview, why on earth would you get the military out before you got your civilians out? It's just such a lack of planning, such a blatant lack of planning. Then they try to turn around and blame the Trump administration. Look, the Trump administration's plan was to at least listen to conditions on the ground before pulling out. And if the Taliban were breaking the rules, if they were going on the offensive, as they did in this case, then that would negate the negotiations. That would negate the deal. And so I don't know what the Biden administration was thinking. They were also started this pullout in the middle of fighting season, which is a terrible idea.
It was poorly thought through. And Congressman, you have very succinct words on a lot of things, but I can tell how deeply this affects you emotionally, as me as well. So thank you very much for your time, sir. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, Carl.